Hi, I'm Jane Marcilio, and I'm the music teacher behind Cilio Music. I've been teaching general music since 2009, and I currently teach music for ages 2 through kindergarten. I miss the older kids, but teaching early childhood comes the most naturally to me, and it's definitely my happy place. For this session, I'll talk about two areas of the brain, the learning brain and the survival brain. The way we discipline students is different for each area, and we'll go over how and why we should appeal to the learning brain. For my sources, I'm mostly drawing from the book No Drama Discipline by Dr. Daniel Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, and also a course on trauma-informed education by Candy Gonzalez. The rest of my sources and a link to this book can be found in the handout. Let's get started. The learning brain can be found in the prefrontal cortex. It's not fully developed until around age 21, so kids need help accessing their learning brains. The learning brain is responsible for things like executive functioning, which includes critical thinking, empathy, morality, emotional regulation, and all that good stuff. The survival brain, on the other hand, is comprised of the brainstem and limbic region. It controls the fight, flight, and freeze responses. The survival brain is well developed at birth, so babies are hardwired to access the survival brain automatically. The learning brain is going to be overshadowed by the survival brain because the survival brain keeps us alive when it perceives a threat. So that's why it's difficult and sometimes not possible to access the learning brain if the survival brain is fired up. Because the survival brain is more developed in children, it's easier for them to slip into angry outbursts, tantrums, and fits. They are literally incapable of accessing the learning brain as easily, so we'll be going over some techniques to help them with that. First, I want to start off with a few questions. Do you remember a time when you were disciplined in a caring way? What happened? So feel free to pause the video and think about it. For me, I remember back in first grade, we switched classrooms for math, and I was intimidated by the math teacher because she had a reputation for being stern. One day, I absentmindedly started doodling on my desk. When she walked by me and got my attention, I froze in fear. I thought she was going to scold me in front of the class. Instead, she pointed to the doodle and quietly told me not to forget to erase it before I left. I was so relieved. My next question is, can you think back to an instance when you were disciplined with threats, punishment, or long lectures? For me, in college, one of my music theory professors slammed his hand down on the piano and started lecturing at the class with a raised voice for not finishing an assignment. We had a reason, but I won't get into that. And needless to say, it was a very tense moment. So we sat frozen in our seats, but we weren't thinking about what he was saying or taking his words seriously. I don't even know if half the students were even listening to what he was saying, but we were mostly just waiting for it to end so we could get out of there. So which teacher response do you think was more effective? I can tell you that I never drew on a desk again, and I can also tell you that was not the last Music Theory 4 assignment I did not complete that semester. Well, there's a biological basis for why behavior management with empathy wins over threats and punishment. The learning brain is by nature more reflective. It's responsible for things like empathy, delayed gratification, self-regulation, and organization. This is the brain we want in charge. And for the survival brain to back down, students need to feel safe above all in order to access their learning brains. This will be a much harder task for students who've experienced trauma. Their survival brains are constantly taking in information and assessing their environment for threats. This, of course, makes it harder to focus, plan, stay organized, and self-regulate in school. These students tend to show more aggression, irritability, and inattentiveness. The more we use threats and punishment as discipline, the worse this will get. For our youngest students just entering school for the first time, this is so important. Their initial experience of going to school, if threatening, will be their only frame of reference about school that they can draw from, and they may continue to see school as a threatening place for a long time. When students are using their survival brain, they're in a reactive survival mode, fight, flight, or freeze. If the survival brain takes over, learning will not take place and they aren't able to think about what you're saying. Instead, they're being flooded with stress and adrenaline. So here's a story about a time when I set off the reactive brain in one of my students. Once, a first grader was misbehaving in class and had to sit out of the super fun game we were playing. Come to find, while he had been sitting out, he had been quietly destroying school property. So yeah, that timeout I gave him did nothing in helping him reflect on his actions because he was angry. His reactive brain had taken over and he didn't learn anything. So, what are we supposed to do instead? Let's first talk about the word discipline. The word is derived from the Latin root word discere, which means to learn. A whole brain approach to behavior management focuses on teaching children instead of punishing them. It's age appropriate because young children are still learning how to manage their emotions and behaviors. If emotions are running hot, adding stress to the situation does not teach them. It makes them more upset and it can lead to a power struggle, and those are the worst. Instead, let's teach our kids that difficult feelings are not permanent and we can shift out of them. Difficult feelings aren't bad or wrong to have, and we can learn from them. Teaching children looks so much different from punishing them. We're going to get into what works in the form of discipline, but let's first talk about what doesn't work. And FYI, my niece here has agreed to be a model for the rest of this presentation. Threats and punishment are short-term solutions, and the child is immediately obedient because they're afraid. Discipline via teaching takes longer, but it teaches lifelong skills instead of blind obedience. Threats include a threatening tone, facial expression, and posture. Threats trigger a defensive response in the survival brain, and if it happens, the child's feelings of fight, flight, or freeze will escalate. Even mild threats aren't helpful. So I know there are some teachers who can relate to this. Think about homeroom teachers that drop off the kids to your classroom and leave with threats like, I better get a good report when I pick you up, or no one is going out for recess. Does that ever work? In my experience, it feels counterproductive, and as soon as the teacher's out of sight, what happens? Yep, the class goes absolutely bonkers. Then you feel guilty because you don't want them to lose recess. Another thing that doesn't work well is to lecture. Had my first grade teacher lectured me about drawing on desks, I probably would have been so flushed with embarrassment and anger that I wouldn't have heard a word she said. So, say less. Listen more, say less. Also, shout out to Miss Hockman. Thank you so much. If you've ever done any of these things, use threats, punishment, lectures, guess what? I think we all have, so please don't beat yourself up. We can just learn from this and reset how we do things in the future. So let's get into some productive ways to approach our students when they're having a hard time. The first thing we can do is approach the student in a way that shows you're on their side. When you're approaching, you want their brain to perceive you as non-threatening. Remember, the logical part of their brain is not fully developed while they're in your care. So kids will do things that make no sense to us because they aren't thinking of the consequences. For example, one time when my husband was 8 years old, he shot a shish kebab stick at his cousin's face just because. Thank goodness it ended up sticking to his eyelid and not his eyeball. And his cousin, of course, was furious. But should something happen, should a child do something, approaching with sincere empathy will go a long way. Another way to help them perceive you as non-threatening is to get below their eye level. Dogs have this down. If you've ever watched dogs interact with each other, When they do a play bow, they get their face gets as low to the floor as they can. Or if you've ever seen a dog roll over on their bellies to show the other dog that they're not a threat and they don't want to fight. Towering over kids with criticism, condescension, or irritation will probably sabotage your goal of helping a child move from panic mode to a calmer learning state. The more the shift to the learning brain happens, the stronger this neural connection becomes, and it becomes easier for the child to calm down and use their learning brains in the future. Now, if someone stuck a pointy stick in my eyelid, it would be so difficult to remain calm and approach with empathy. But remember, if you lose your cool, there is a ton of value in modeling how to give a proper apology. All right, so we've approached the child in a caring, non-threatening way. What next? You may have heard of the saying, name it to tame it. When we help students identify what they're feeling and where in their body they're feeling this, they can start to reflect and move into a calmer state. You can say something like, it seems like you're feeling upset. Where do you feel it? It can be confusing for children to name feelings, especially since our body can physiologically respond in similar ways to multiple emotions. A stomach ache could mean that the child is sick with a stomach bug, or nervous about a playing test, or fearful of running into a bully. Listen and validate the child's feelings so they feel heard on an emotional level. It's important to validate their feelings even if you don't agree with them. Here are some example phrases you can use to start off from No Drama Discipline. I know, buddy, it's hard when we all can't have a turn, isn't it? Looks like you're having fun running around the table during this song. Oh, sweetie, it looks like you're having a hard time. Simply describing what the child is doing can also be helpful. You just ran across the room and threw a beanbag. Hey, what's going on? The child may say, oh, I'm mad that I didn't get a turn. You can reply with, it's okay to be mad, but what can we do instead of throwing things when we're mad? Adding humor usually helps. My beanbag is hurt, and now I have to take it to the hospital. Ugh, I don't have money for that. Can I borrow $5? Another way to disarm younger students with humor is to use a silly voice. They love silly voices. So I have a frog puppet that I use, and he's a grumpy frog who talks in a grumpy voice, and they love him. If I'm getting irritated with a class, being silly with my frog puppet cheers them up, and it cheers me up too. Wiring positive experiences in the brain with difficult feelings is so helpful. Now let's move on to teaching children how to take accountability for their actions. We can let our students know that it's okay to feel how they feel, but not always okay to do what we want. In general, we want to explain how their actions were inappropriate. It's hard when we're upset, but yelling at our friends is hurtful. We can ask them how they think the other person involved is feeling and what they should do next. It's okay for the child to sit in the discomfort of what they've done. A neural link between feeling guilty and their regrettable actions will develop and contribute to their sense of morality. Instead of threats and punishment, we can leave space for them to try again with phrases like, I bet you can think of some kinder words to use when the line leader isn't paying attention. Or, let's try stacking the music stands in a safer way. This at least gets them to practice doing the right thing. For younger students, you wouldn't scold them for playing a rhythm incorrectly. You would provide more practice. For older students, they know that trying again is better than being punished. We can also offer alternatives and choices. If it's too hard for you to let others use the drum, we need to play something different, like this triangle. For younger kids that are melting down, you can still set boundaries in a caring way. It looks like you're upset and having a hard time stopping your body from throwing the shaker eggs. I will help you by putting the eggs away. This may not end a meltdown, but it will address a safety issue in a caring way. Something that I've seen my friend use with her child to much success is reframing a no into a conditional yes. A hard no, coming at someone with a hard no, triggers their survival brain. So try something like, yes, you can have more time with the drums, but it'll have to wait until next class. This will give the child something to look forward to and help them manage disappointment. We can also ask students for solutions with a question. What do you think we can do to make things better? What do you think has to happen next? Tell me more about what you're doing here. How can we make it so all the kids have a turn with the crayons? Next, let's talk about some preventable things we can do. Classroom routines will take care of a lot of behaviors. I've noticed that with a predictable routine, younger students will often remind me if I skip something. And with my older students, I've noticed that when too many novel things are introduced, that's when they start to put on the brakes. For example, if I start doing a brand new set of vocal warm-ups, some middle schoolers may drag their feet, worry about sounding silly in front of their peers. But if we have a routine for warm-ups that we do every time, they just do them. It's automatic. Just like starting a band rehearsal with the B-flat scale. It's not the most exciting part of the class, but no one's really complaining about it. Clear expectations and boundaries are also helpful. I've realized that without boundaries, some students really push their limits, and it's much harder for me to backtrack and correct the behavior than to state your expectations beforehand. So setting limits and boundaries are healthy for our students because it provides them opportunities to practice using their learning brains. It's different for every child, but I've noticed that around pre-K, kids are starting to understand when they've crossed the line. It's definitely not perfect, but with reminders, they can do pretty well. For my 2-year-old classes, I mostly just go with their flow because they're so young. So this is where a solid routine is super helpful. If you're interested in a great classroom boundaries poster, Dr. Missy Strong has one with the phrase, in music, have fun, but don't cross the line. Or you could say something like, in music, we have fun without crossing the line. And I'll link to this poster in the presentation notes. Keep up with naming the feeling, explaining that it's not okay, and providing alternatives, all with empathy and kindness. By repeating these steps, the brain will start rewiring itself to access the learning brain, to delay gratification, and to reflect on their actions, and to use self-control. You won't get the response you want every time, especially at first, but don't give up. For younger students, it might seem like they're being oppositional, but it could just be a situation where the child is having trouble regulating their feelings. Sometimes moving our bodies can help our minds break out of upsetting feelings. This can be helpful advice for kids who are feeling anxious, like for an audition or before a performance, or for yourself when you feel like you've slipped into a reactive state. You can try moving around, taking a short walk, taking a drink of water, some deep breaths, and just trying to access your prefrontal cortex and calm that survival brain down. For the littles, they'll be happy with any kind of movement. They love crawling on the floor to music, slithering like snakes, hopping like bunnies, whatever, and it's super cute to watch. The big hit song for us last year was The Floor is Lava by the Kaboomers. During the verses, they dance, wiggle, crawl, and tiptoe, and on the refrain, they scamper to a chair with their feet lifted off the floor because obviously it's made of lava. And then we practice keeping a steady beat either by clapping, tapping our shoes together, tapping the chair, playing the rhythm sticks, and all kinds of other things. I also like to watch them and see how they keep the beat and borrow ideas from what they're doing. So that's The Floor is Lava by the Kaboomers. Look it up, and if you use it, I'm so sorry because they will ask for it every day. And a lot of parents have also told me that they are constantly asking for this song at home. What about the big kids? Aren't they kind of shy about moving around? And yes. So one way I get around the shyness is by putting movement into games so they're less focused on how they look and how they're moving and more focused on the rules of the game. So these two games, the Drum Beats 4 and Four Corners, were the biggest hits with my kids, even middle school students. And I think a few teachers have told me they've used Four Corners with high school too. So if you remember back to earlier in the presentation, I had my little friend who sat out and then was very unhappy about it. It's because we were playing the Drum Beats 4, and it's a super fun game where kids have to switch seats very quickly. So I use this game all the time, almost every day at the end of class to review rhythms. And when the kids left, they just had a little pep in their step. We ended on a really happy note. And I'd love for you to check it out in my shop. I'll link to it in the handouts. Same goes for my Four Corners. This is the next favorite game I used with all grade levels, and includes rhythm as well as solfege, dynamics, and all that kind of stuff. I created this style of game because I had a particularly rainy season of second grade recess duty, and whenever we had indoor recess, the kids wanted to play Four Corners. And so I took the rules of Four Corners and put it into a slideshow and turned it into a whole group game that the whole class could play. And this was also just a huge hit with everyone. So I linked to that in my handout. And next, I just wanted to share that we do have an exhibit hall. So there's a movement category in the virtual exhibit hall at themusiccrew.com. And don't forget to get your training certificate in the upper right-hand corner. You can find me most places at Cilio Music and ciliomusic.com. Thank you so much for watching, and please stick around for Julia's session on formative assessment that middle school students will actually enjoy. All right, thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.